During the playing career of Ray Lewis, there were four other linebackers who he was frequently compared to. They all played at about the same time, they all played at a very high level, and they all brought at least somewhat similar things to the defenses that they were on. Three of these four players did not make my list. They are Zach Thomas, Brian Urlacher, and Junior Seau. But the fourth one did. And this fourth one, little forgotten in my opinion in the history of great NFL defensive players. Because he's a quiet man, unassuming in many ways, and he played for a small market franchise. But if you look at the impact that he had on his defenses, as well as the overall performance of that defense, as well as the individual contributions of this player, you can come to no other conclusion. Derrick Brooks is one of the 10 best defensive players in NFL history, and more than most people may think, he stacks up to Ray Lewis. As for exactly how, I'm going to take this video to get into that. So, just as we did previously with Ray Lewis, let's delve into the career of Derrick Brooks of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and see how he compares. Alright, Derrick Brooks, let's take a look at his career statistics. 14 seasons played in the NFL, 224 games, 1,698 tackles, 1,283 of them solo, 13.5 sacks, 24 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries, 25 picks, 530 interception return yards, 6 pick sixes, 112 passes defended, approximate value of 190. And if you weight that value, it comes out to 141. That gives him an average season of 16 games, 121 tackles, 92 solo, a sack, 2 forced fumbles, 30% chance of a fumble recovery, 2 picks, 38 pick return yards, 40% chance he'd return a pick for a touchdown, 8 passes defended, and an approximate value of 14. That gives him the average game of, well, for whatever these statistics are worth, 8 tackles, 6 of them solo, and then you can see the percentages there. 50% chance of pass defended, which is pretty much what Ray Lewis has as well. So we see some obvious similarities here. Now, obviously, the two players played different positions. Ray Lewis played in the middle. Derrick Brooks was an outside linebacker. But we can certainly compare the players in certain areas. And the thing I really want to talk about here with Derrick Brooks is, in my opinion, the most impressive part about his career. He averaged 16 games a season. He did not miss a single game in his career to injury. He played all 16 games every single year of his career, which in my opinion is pretty amazing when you're playing defensive football. And, you know, maybe he wasn't known as a super hard hitter or anything like that, but still, it's defensive football. And if you go back to Ray Lewis, he missed an average of 2 or 3 games a year. Some years he missed most of the season, in fact, and you know, it does build up over a while. And what I get from this is that maybe Ray Lewis was better than Derrick Brooks when they were both on the field, but Derrick Brooks was just on the field more. I mean, another way to look at this is that Ray Lewis played 3 more seasons than Derrick Brooks, but only played in 4 more games. And, you know, just to further encapsulate that point, if you look at the average season again, both Derrick Brooks and Ray Lewis averaged 121 tackles a season, 92 solo. Derrick Brooks did it in 16 games, Ray Lewis did it in 13-14. So Ray Lewis was a more productive player when he was actually on the field. Derrick Brooks was simply on the field more. Now, I think if you're looking at these two career statistic resumes, you give a slight edge to Ray Lewis, but it's really not as wide a margin as you might think it is before you really look at the numbers like this. So they're very close. Now we get to the playoff statistics of Derrick Brooks. Admittedly, it gets a little shaky here, but we'll get into that as we go along. 7 seasons in the playoffs, 11 games, 92 tackles, 68 solo, half a sack. He's forced a fumble. He's recovered a fumble. 2 interceptions, 44 interception return yards, and 1 pick six. Also 3 passes defended, which gives him an average game of 8 tackles, 6 solo, and then you can look at the percentages there. Really a little thin right here, especially when you compare him to a guy like Ray Lewis, who was in the playoffs much more and seemed to also be a more productive player, even on a per-game basis. So here, you certainly have to say Ray Lewis is a big winner. But let's continue on. Now we come to the ever-important category of team success over Derrick Brooks's 14 seasons in which, again, he did not miss a single game. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers won 118 games and they lost 106, giving him a winning percentage of exactly 53%. Now, Tampa Bay, not exactly the most storied franchise ever, not exactly the most successful franchise ever. They have trouble drawing superior talent from time to time, perhaps. But, Ray Lewis came into the league on a terrible Ravens team, so you can only excuse that so far. Not a stellar winning percentage, but still better than average. And as for team playoff success, it gets thin here as well. Over the 7 seasons, 5 wins, 6 losses, and a 45 winning percentage. This is where a guy like Ray Lewis really just blew away from some of his competition by what he did over the last 5 years of his career, making the playoffs and winning playoff games every single year. So clearly, there are some categories where Ray Lewis just dominates Derrick Brooks, and there's not much else you can say about it. So let's look at this one category that may make us re-evaluate the way we look at these two players. Defensive ranks of the teams that they played on, another very important category. Ray Lewis seemed to do quite well in this category, but let's take a look at how Derrick Brooks did. In terms of points, Derrick Brooks was on the best defense in the league in terms of points allowed once, 2002. He was on a top 5 defense 6 times, almost half of his career, and he was on a top 10 defense 12 times, leaving just 2 more years that kick around closer to the bottom of the league. So 12 out of 14 times he was in the top 30% of the league, for an average rank over his career of 7th. Now, just to remind you, Ray Lewis was 9th. So Derrick Brooks has him beat here. Not by some incredibly wide margin, perhaps, but Derrick Brooks's defenses, on average, have been better than Ray Lewis' defenses, if you take into account every year of their careers. Now let's take a look at yards, and this is even more impressive, in my opinion, for Derrick Brooks. The #1 defense in terms of yards twice, and he was on a top 5 defense 8 times. 8 out of 14, that's more than half. I said something similar for Ray Lewis. It's also true of Derrick Brooks. They were also top 10, that would be 11 times. So 11 out of 14 years, they were at least in the top 10, and then you have 3 extra years kicking around at the bottom. Once again, average rank of 7th. Ray Lewis, again, was 9th. So Derrick Brooks's defenses, on average, if you take into account every year, which is arguably fair to both players, Derrick Brooks just seems to have a leg up here, and you gotta say this is a very significant category, and it has to be taken into account. How about some career accolades for Derrick Brooks? 11-time Pro Bowler, 1-time Pro Bowl MVP for whatever that's worth. Not much, but still. First-team All-Pro 6 times, second-team All-Pro 3 times, 1-time NFL Defensive Player of the Year in 2002. Also that year, NFL Alumni Linebacker of the Year, and a NFC champion and Super Bowl champion 1 time. And if you take his approximate value that I mentioned above and compare it to everyone else who ever played this game, Derrick Brooks is actually 14th. And if you take the weighted value, 13th. So that's all very strong. But if you look at these numbers and you compare them to what we saw with Ray Lewis earlier, it just seems like Ray Lewis consistently just did more of these things. He made a couple more Pro Bowls, made the All-Pro team a few more times. He was a Defensive Player of the Year more times. He won an extra Super Bowl, obviously an extra conference championship. So while Derrick Brooks certainly compares well to 99% of the players who have played this game, Ray Lewis is just a little bit better. As we look at Derrick Brooks's peak season, that theme of Ray Lewis just being a little bit better will continue to come back. So Derrick Brooks's peak season absolutely has to be 2002. 117 tackles, 87 solo, a sack, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, 5 interceptions, which is incredible for an outside linebacker, 218 interception return yards, an incredible number, and 3 pick sixes, which is Nuts. 11 passes defended and a 22 approximate value, one of the highest numbers for a linebacker ever. You add it all up and you get an average game of 7 tackles, 5 solo. You can look at the percentages down there. 70% chance he was going to deflect a pass, which seems like a very high number for a linebacker. And then you get to the defensive ranks, which, as I covered earlier, #1 in the league in points and yards, 12.2 points a game, 253 yards a game. Really just incredible stuff right there. Now, postseason, 3 games, 17 tackles, 13 of them solo, half a sack, a fumble recovery, 2 interceptions, 44 interception return yards, 1 pick six, and 3 passes defended. Average it all out, he had about 6 tackles a game, 4 of them solo, 70% chance of an interception, 1 pass deflection a game. Pretty strong numbers, maybe not in the traditional senses, but he did make a lot of plays during this particular postseason run, and the level of defense that the Buccaneers played reflected it. They were #1 in defense in terms of points, 12.3 points a game allowed, and in terms of yards as well, 270 yards allowed per game, and quite a few of those yards were frankly in garbage time against the Raiders in the Super Bowl. So, pretty strong peak season. And let's wrap things up with a look at the best games from Derrick Brooks' career. 1996, September 15th at the Denver Broncos. Early in his career, a 19-tackle game. And remember, he was an outside linebacker, not a middle linebacker. My opinion probably makes it more impressive. 18 of those tackles were solo, 1 pick, 6 pick return yards in a 27-23 defeat. Tough loss. 1999, October 24th versus the Chicago Bears. 10 tackles, 7 of them solo, 2 picks, 13 interception return yards, and a grand total of 4 passes defended, which is a strong number for anybody on defense, and especially an outside linebacker, in a 6-3 victory. So that one was certainly hard-earned. And then you have 2002, September 15th at the Baltimore Ravens. 4 tackles, 1 interception, took it back 97 yards for a touchdown in a 25-0 victory. Hey, against Ray Lewis, how kind of making everything full circle there. All right, let's take a look at his postseasons. 2003 will feature both of his best postseason games. That much is, I think, pretty obvious when you consider that 3 of Derrick Brooks' 5 career playoff victories did come in 2003. First, we have the San Francisco 49ers, 7 tackles, 5 of them solo, 1 interception, and a pass deflection in a 31-6 victory as the Buccaneers got their Super Bowl run on the rails. And then 2 weeks later in the Super Bowl, January 26th against the Oakland Raiders, 3 tackles, 2 solo, and the signature play of his career. He took an interception back 44 yards for a touchdown in a 48-21 Super Bowl victory. In conclusion, Derrick Brooks has had an amazing career. And for the purposes of this comparison, you can say that he was a more durable player than Ray Lewis, and his defenses were, on average, better. Not something you would probably have expected from this comparison. However, when it comes to things like individual contributions, career accolades, and several other important categories, Ray Lewis simply outpaces Derrick Brooks to the point where you really could argue that Derrick Brooks is about 90% of Ray Lewis, but Ray Lewis is quite simply 1 or 2 pegs higher. At the time that Derrick Brooks retired, after the 2008 season, you could have made a really good argument that Ray Lewis and Derrick Brooks were about equal on the career scales. But Ray Lewis kept playing. He played 4 more seasons. He made the playoffs 4 more times. He won 7 or 8 more playoff games, and he won another Super Bowl title. And because of those late career awards, he has well outpaced Derrick Brooks. And while I cannot tell you with 100% assurity where Derrick Brooks is going to be on this list, I know that Ray Lewis is going to be higher than Derrick Brooks. Stay tuned for the next part.